Donald Trump's tariffs and how to respond to them has been a topic of hot debate right around the world this week. 25% tariffs on steel and aluminium have been imposed. Now, for Australia, that doesn't necessarily have a big impact. They make up only a modest part of our overall exports. But what comes next could be more concerning. We'll find out on the 2nd of April the second round tariffs that Donald Trump intends to apply, and that could include seafood, beef, lamb, pharmaceuticals. The Albanese government here in Australia is worried about this, but it's not going to be following some others and imposing tit-for-tat reciprocal tariffs. But I'm interested to explore how this is going down in the United States. How are Americans viewing the, looming trade war and the impact it's likely to have on their prices in America? And will the popularity or unpopularity of these tariffs ultimately be what makes up Donald Trump's mind? Will he stick with this trade agenda, or will he reverse course if his own approval ratings, not to mention the stock market, continue to plummet? I'm David Speers on Ngunnawal Country at Parliament House in Canberra. Welcome to Insiders on Background. Well, Michael Strain is the Director of Economic Policy Studies at the conservative think tank American Enterprise Institute, and he joins me now.
Thanks a lot for having me. It's great to be with you.
So tell me, what will these tariffs do to the American economy in your view?
Well, they're not going to do anything good, and that's, I think, the problem. These tariffs are going to increase the prices that consumers face. These tariffs are going to increase the costs that manufacturing businesses face in order to make their products. They're going to make U.S. manufacturing companies less competitive. They are going to reduce employment opportunities in the U.S. manufacturing sector. They are not going to have any meaningful effect on the overall U.S. trade deficit. They are going to hurt our alliances with other nations, with long-time allies, at a time of rising geopolitical tension. And so, there's no upside here. They're a lose.
That's quite a list. That's quite a list when you go through it there. Is there no short-term benefit for manufacturers at all? Will some companies want to relocate to the United States to avoid these tariffs?
I think you'll be able to find examples of companies that are better off as a consequence of these tariffs. But the manufacturing sector as a whole, kind of if you disaggregate the manufacturing sector into broad categories, those categories they're all going to suffer. And the reason for that is because the global economy is integrated across national boundaries. If we put a tariff on imports from Canada, if we put a tariff on imports from Mexico, if we put a tariff on imports from the European Union, then what we're doing is we're raising the costs to businesses located in the United States, because businesses in the United States import a whole bunch of what they need from other countries. And so, sure, I think you will be able to find specific companies that are better off as a consequence of this. But for every one of those companies, there's going to be 24 that are worse off because their costs have gone up. And, again, we have to think about American consumers as well. Consumers are going to face higher prices when they go to the store. They're going to face higher prices at the grocery store. They're going to face higher prices when they go shopping for clothing. They're going to face higher prices when they buy anything that is imported. That's going to make.
And how long will that take to be felt, to be seen on the supermarket shelf, in the shopping aisle? And how are Americans feeling about that at the moment?
Oh, I think it will not take much time at all. When the tariffs kick in, they're going to pretty quickly show up in consumer prices. And your question is a good one. How are the American people feeling about it? So much has happened. I feel like we're living 1 month of history in every day. The president's proposed tariff plans fluctuate by the hour on some days. And so it's taken a little while for public opinion polling to catch up. But the most recent polling I saw was a CNN poll that showed that 61% of Americans disapprove of President Trump's handling of tariffs. That is That is a solid majority of the American people. This is
And that's
before
before prices have actually gone up, right?
or prices have actually gone up. Exactly. So this is not going to be popular.
So will that change Donald Trump's mind? I mean, how influenced will he be by poll numbers like that? I mean, this was such a core part of his election campaign. Tariffs, the most beautiful word, or whatever it was, third or fourth most beautiful word
The most beautiful word
yeah.
in the English language.
So is
Um,
he likely to shift on this if there is a really noticeable public backlash?
I think he is. I mean, I think that's, kind of the $1 million question. Um, a big part of the excitement that investors felt when President Trump won the election was based on the assumption that he would not go forward with policies that were inflicting severe economic damage for a long period of time. I think that's, basically the right bet. I think the
Mm.
president is a true mercantilist. He genuinely and incorrectly believes that if the United States is running a bilateral trade deficit with another nation, that in a very real sense, the US is losing economic value and that other nation is gaining economic value. And I think what he needs to do is put his hand on the hot stove. And that's, kind of what we're seeing, I think. The question is, how long does he have to keep his hand on the hot stove before he takes it off? My guess is that that will be measured in weeks or months and not in years.
Mm.
But that's the question.
Well, and it's not just the opinion polls; it's the stock market too, right? Because we've seen that heading south rapidly this week as well.
Yeah, so where I am talking to you from, it's about 4:45 in the afternoon, and the market just closed here in the United States, and we are officially in a correction. The market is down 10% relative to its all-time high, which it hit just about 3 weeks ago. 10% of the value of the market has evaporated as a consequence of President Trump's pursuit of higher tariffs. That's a lot of money. That's
And
that's
that's people's
money,
retirement savings too, isn't it?
people's retirement savings. It's people's net worth, and people aren't going to like that, and that's going to have a political effect.
So you think weeks, and we're talking weeks and months before you expect to see Trump change course somehow on this?
Yeah, that's my judgment. I mean, you know, I think we're going to have some time for the data to catch up.
Mm.
And economic statistics are produced with a lag. If you want to know what effect are the tariffs or the discussion around tariffs having on the U.S. job market in the month of March, you're going to have to wait until late April to know the answer to that. If you want to know how our higher prices showing up for consumers, you're going to have to wait a few weeks to know that from the time the tariffs go into effect. What's this doing to consumer spending? You're going to have to wait a few weeks after the tariffs go into effect to learn that. And so there's going to be a lag built in. Same thing with public opinion. It takes time for pollsters to write their poll questions and issue their polls and tabulate their results. But I think what you're going to see is a situation where the president's approval rating goes down, where disapproval of his trade policy keeps climbing. And if he waits long enough, you're going to see economic effects. You're going to see consumers pulling back their spending. You're going to see prices rising, particularly of goods to which the tariffs are applied. And this is going to have a political consequence as the president's approval rating continues to drop, and as economic pain continues to grow. That's going to create political pressure on Republicans who are in the U.S. House of Representatives and in the U.S. Senate to speak out. It's going to create more room for CEOs to speak out, and the president's going to, be hearing from Republican members of the House who are up for reelection in 2026, and some of them who are in swing districts are going to say, Mr. President, this is going to cost me my seat, and political pressure is going to grow.
Yeah, well, I'm fascinated to see how we reached this point, right? Because if what you're saying is right, that This is so wrong on the jobs front, the prices front, the alliance front, the political front for Donald Trump as well. How did he end up here? Is it the people? I mean, is this an ideological? It seems to be a core ideological view of Donald Trump. He's talked about tariffs as the answer to America's woes for years, for decades, and he's now surrounded by people who strongly share that view. Howard Lutnick, for example, the Commerce Secretary, Pete Navarro, his trade advisor. How did we reach this point where he's got it so wrong in your view on this?
This is a genuinely held belief he has. And if you go back and watch interviews of the president during the 1980s, he's saying exactly the same things about China. I'm sorry, he's saying exactly the same things about Japan in the 1980s that he's saying about China today. He has for decades been consistent in his view that bilateral trade deficits are a sign that America is losing economic value. They're a sign that America has struck a bad deal with other countries. He's recently said things like, "Why would the United States import lumber?" So the U.S. imports a lot of lumber from Canada. He says, "Why would the U.S. import lumber? We have tons and tons of lumber here in the United States." He asks, "Why does the U.S. import automobiles from Canada? We have an automobile manufacturing sector here in the United States." And this is his view. He thinks that if we're buying stuff from other nations that we could be producing here, that we're losing out, that we're losing jobs and income. He is wrong about that. That is just the wrong way to think about international commerce.
But he is convinced of that, and so are those around him. I mean, we've had a domestic political argument this week about whether Australia could have done more, whether our Prime Minister should have gone there and pleaded with Trump for an exemption. It doesn't seem like anyone, well, we know no one has got an exemption. Do you think it makes a difference for leaders to go and beg at the feet of Donald Trump?
I do. I think the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, did a absolutely magnificent job of currying favor with President Trump by showing up in the Oval Office with a letter from King Charles III inviting the president for a second official state visit. I think that sort of thing matters. This is one of the problems with the kind of trade policy that the president is pursuing. It is just dripping with opportunities for cronyism and for corruption and for exemptions and all that sort of thing. We saw a ton of that happen in President Trump's first term. President Biden continued with these sorts of industrial policies. He preferred subsidies to tariffs. We saw the same sort of cronyism and corruption with President Biden's industrial subsidies. And if President Trump moves forward with substantial increases in tariffs on imports, you're going to see a whole bunch of cronyism and a whole bunch of corruption. And I do think that if you're a company that's going to get hurt by these tariffs, if you're a sector that's going to get hurt by the tariffs, or if you're a foreign nation that's going to get hurt by the tariffs, my advice would be go see the president and try and get an exemption.
Well, we don't have a letter from the king to take, even though he's our king as well. But leaving that to one side, would be one thing Australia would be offering, and has tried to offer and did talk to the Commerce Secretary about via our ambassador, is critical minerals. We know Donald Trump is keen on critical minerals. We've got plenty of them. Problem is, China dominates this market, and a lot of these projects don't stack up. China are often accused of manipulating the market to keep others out. Look, Anthony Albanese did strike a critical minerals compact with Joe Biden a couple of years ago with the Biden administration. Doesn't look like it's gone very far. Maybe that deal can be sweetened for Donald Trump. Do you think that's something that would work?
I think it's hard to know what would work and what wouldn't, but I certainly think it's worth a shot. And I think President Trump has made it clear that he is, willing to grant exemptions and willing to do carve-outs and willing to make deals. And, personal flattery seems to work with him.
What about reciprocal tariffs or retaliatory tariffs? Canada, the Europeans, they've gone down that path. Australia is not. We've come to the view, similar to your view, that this only hurts the local consumers. Why would we want to push up prices here? Do you think he is likely, though, to pay attention to those retaliatory tariffs from others, or what happens when they do that?
I think he is. So what we saw in his first term was a big increase in tariffs on Chinese imports. China retaliated against American farmers, against the U.S. agriculture sector. That really hurt our farmers, and President Trump had to bail out our farmers as a consequence. He had to subsidize U.S. agricultural production as a consequence of Chinese retaliatory tariffs. That created pressure on President Trump. Like ultimately, I think the question is, would tariffs on Chinese imports have increased higher than they otherwise did as a consequence of China's retaliation? I don't think we really know the answer to that question, but we do know that President Trump felt a lot of pressure from the agriculture sector that was hit with those retaliatory tariffs. I think the point of levying retaliatory tariffs only make sense if you think that they're going to get the president to not increase tariffs on your country as much, or to bring them down. And that's a kind of a case by case situation. I understand why Canada wants to do that. I understand why the EU wants to do it. I think the calculus for Australia could be a little bit more challenging.
So, Michael, just finally, it sounds from what you're saying as though, look, we can think about retaliatory tariffs and whether they'll work. The most likely thing to change Donald Trump's mind on this and reverse course is going to be what happens where you are, and that's the poll numbers and that's the market.
Yeah, I think if the president is interested in Republicans winning the 2026 elections, when the entire U.S. House of Representatives will be up for election, and when a third of the U.S. Senate will be up for election, and a bunch of governors of U.S. states will be up for election, if the president wants the Republican Party to do well in the 2026 election, then he's going to feel pressure about the harm that these trade policies are causing. He's also going to hear a lot from business leaders who aren't making investment plans and who are kind of, putting a halt to any plans to expand. He's going to hear from investors who are seeing their wealth evaporate. And so, he's going to be under a lot of pressure. If he wants to win the 26 midterm elections, he's going to have to respond to that pressure. The nightmare scenario is if he says, I'm not all that interested in what happens in the 26 elections. I'm not all that interested in what happens in the 2028 presidential election. I think this is right, and I'm going to do it. If that's his attitude, then we're in for a lot more trouble. But I suspect it won't be his attitude. I suspect he will respond to political pressure. And the longer this lasts, the more intense the political pressure on him is going to be.
Well, the pressure is being felt around the world through these tariffs this week, no doubt about it. Michael Strain from the American Enterprise Institute. Good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
And if you have any thoughts on this conversation or ideas for the podcast, do drop us a line, insiders@abc.net.au. We'll have a lot more on the tariff situation and the broader implications for the US relationship on Insiders. Hope you can join us then, 9 a.m. Sunday on ABC TV. Bye for now.